I'm Julie Alexandria.
And I'm Jennifer Mercedes.
Between the two of us, we have over 2 decades of experience working in professional sports.
We're telling the stories of women who are at the top of their game in sports and business.
Welcome
to the Locker Room.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locker Room Talk. I'm Jennifer Mercedes, joined by Julie Alexandria, and our guest today is Lakia Holmes. She is the senior producer of Diversified content at Turner Sports and Bleacher Report. Welcome to the Locker Room, Lakia.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's get right into it. Growing up in New York, you have 2 choices. You're either a New York Yankees fan or a Mets fan. What led you to be a masochist and become a Mets fan? I love the Mets. I love my Mets. But I also know you suffer a lot.
Firing shots right out the gate. Sheesh. It's a question I'm asked a lot. So the funny thing is my mom and my dad are Yankee fans. And I grew up, I'm from Manhattan, I'm from Harlem. I grew up the steps from the old Polo Grounds and right across the bridge from Yankee Stadium. And my dad even lived like a block or 2 blocks away from Yankee Stadium. So I'd go to his house, like, and there was a game on, like we could hear the crowd outside before we saw it on the TV. But the thing is that I spent the majority of my time watching baseball with my grandma and her mom, and they were Met fans, because they started out as Brooklyn Dodgers fans. So I just grew up watching the Mets, and then that's kind of how my love for the Mets just came in, despite, you know, my parents being Yankee fans. And growing up so close to Yankee Stadium, yes, in some ways, I guess I am a masochist, but as you can see, like, I'm all about the orange and blue, and, you know, I'll be a Met fan for life. I love them. And, you know, even though there are moments where they just get me so frustrated, you know, you have to stick with it, because when they do win the World Series next time, like, it'll just make it that much sweeter.
Absolutely. Who's your all-time favorite? Like, do you have an all-time favorite Mets player?
I'd have to say Doc Gooden. And I didn't necessarily appreciate what Doc did until now, watching Jacob deGrom do what he does. Because when I was watching Doc, like, I was still, you know, I was a kid. And so, but he's doing like the same things. And then I think the other thing about Doc was that he had a lot of demons that got in his way. And it's like, what could have been had he not had like all of those issues off the field? And that's something that I can very much empathize with, dealing with people in my life that have had substance abuse issues. But to see the strides that he's made and stuff like that, it just made him that much more of a human being rather than just a pitcher. And I even had a chance to work with him earlier this year, and that just kind of also solidified that for me.
That's awesome.
That's great.
All right. Well, speaking of the universal language of baseball and how it can help us through so many ups and downs and struggles, personal and otherwise, how do you see that the universal language of baseball and sports can be a powerful unifying tool or a connective tissue, especially in the very divided world that we live in today?
I mean, I think we just take a look at all of the stuff that's happened socially, you know, that's raised our social consciousness over the last, you know, 2 years or so. And, you know, you think about, you know, we always talk about, you know, how the NBA is kind of the league that's leading and spearheading those charges, you know, when it comes to, you know, diversity and equality and stuff like that. And baseball is always kind of slow to kind of catch up in some ways. And so I think what we saw last year in the midst of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that, is that players were communicating more. I talked to a few players and they said that they used that time as teaching moments to kind of just talk and open up that dialogue, have those conversations that are very uncomfortable but need to be had, that you need to have. And so, we always see how sports brings people together through good times, bad times. It's the unifier. But to see the great like national pastime, baseball, to see, I remember watching was the Marlins and the Mets, and they, stepped out on the field and they weren't going to, and just that moment they laid out the Black Lives Matter t-shirt on home plate. And it's just like, wow, that's the power of sports and being able to have the spotlight and the platform to be able to make statements like that. And that's the beauty of sports, because so much is wrapped around. It's not just what's happening on the field, it's bigger than sports. I know we've heard that catchphrase a lot over the last, year and a half, 2 years. But it's true. And, these guys are more than athletes. These men and women that are out here taking the field, doing what they love to do, they're more than athletes. And so again, to have that platform, to be able to just be like, hey, this is what's going on. Y'all need to take a look at it. It's powerful.
It is. And I said 2020 definitely birthed a new type of player specifically in MLB, because we never saw baseball players except for, oh my goodness, his name escapes me now, that he took the knee. He was the only one.
Kaepernick?
No, in baseball.
Oh, Bruce Maxwell.
Bruce Maxwell, yes. Bruce Maxwell took the knee. He was the only one at that time. And after 2020 or during 2020, we saw a different type of player. We saw them actually speaking up, speaking out, not being afraid, because we all know who heads MLB and the type of culture that exists. And I was very happy, right, that change kind of is happening slowly but surely. Like you said, MLB is always kind of the last one to fall in line. But yeah, I think it's awesome that things are changing and moving in the right direction. And another thing that is really, really cool is how you got started in your career. Your sports media career began in college, having the opportunity to work as a sideline reporter for your university, then as ESPNU Campus Connection reporter, and as a studio production intern for Baseball Tonight and SportsCenter. How did those experiences early on, what did you learn from them? How did they shape you into who you are today?
It definitely taught me that I really needed to go out there and get what I wanted, because all of those positions are so competitive. I remember when I applied for my internship at ESPN, and, there's something that like, it's in the 5 figures of the number of students that apply to the summer internship program at ESPN, right? And the year that I was an intern, they only had 90 interns total. So that ratio is just astonishing. And I was only one of 6 studio production interns. So, it's very competitive. And, as we found that in this industry, it's you have a lot of people going for so few spots. And so it just taught me to just kind of like grind and persevere and just make the connections I need to make, whether it's, people in other departments, at other networks, companies, whatever, and just kind of leaning on them for their advice. And it also, having those opportunities was great, because by the time I finished school, I had a bit of a head start compared to everyone else and like I was graduating with or that I was interning with. but also at the same time, it was a double-edged sword, because then it was like, well, you're too qualified, you're overqualified for some of these like entry level positions, but then it's like, well, you don't have enough experience for it. So it's like, it's a catch-22. But it taught me just what it's like to work in sports, and having to work weekends and holidays, and just, you know, it makes me appreciate, you know, just the journey that I've gone on. It just makes me grateful that I was even able to have those moments, you know, interning at ESPN. Like, how many people get to say they do that? Not many.
No, I mean, that's an incredible foundation, and just the wealth of knowledge then coming into any job. I would imagine you already have such an incredible base. You know, being a female, you mentioned some of the things that can be difficult or can be challenging, like you said, a catch-22. And unfortunately, it is just the plain truth that being a woman in any industry, but especially sports, it comes with a lot of challenges that men will never face or have any idea of what it means to live that. So one of those things means choosing to be a mom. And if you do choose to be a mom, also choosing to be a working mom and have a career. So yeah. Can you speak a little bit about your fertility journey and what led you to this place?
It's been, well, I always knew I wanted to have children. So I'll start there. Being a mom, that was always like the number one thing on my list. But I did not have the greatest childhood. So for me, it was all about wanting to make sure I did it right, and that I didn't make the same mistakes that my parents made with me. So in my mind, it was like, well, I have to make sure I'm like incredibly self-sufficient. My money has to be stacked up a certain way. I have to have a certain type of job. I have to find the right guy. I have to have the big church wedding and the 5-bedroom house and the picket fence and da 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 da. And it was like, I want all of these things, but in order for me to get all of these things, I have to focus on my career first and get myself where I feel like I should be or need to be in order to have the rest. And my career's kind of taken a lot of twists and turns. And so my career, there's a lot of times I feel like I'm probably not where I should be career-wise, based on age alone, not like talent or anything like that, but just based on age, because I'll be 38 this weekend, actually. And it's like, well, I feel like I should have had this much money saved up by now. I should, you know. And so I had set all these expectations up for myself. And meanwhile, like my mom and my friends, like all of my college roommates, they're like, when are you going to like get married and have kids and da 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 da? And my answer was always like, you know, I'm just not ready yet. I want to make sure I have the right partner, blah, blah, blah. And so when I got my job at Bleacher Report and Turner Sports, luckily they offer fertility benefits. So I went to the doctor just to, you know, kind of explore my options, just to like freeze my eggs. And then, you know, you have to go through all these tests and stuff. And then they did this one test and they said, well, it looks like you'll have a 0% chance of getting pregnant naturally. They were like, your best option, well, really your only option, especially a safe option, would be to do in vitro fertilization. So now in my mind, it's like, it went from, oh, well, I have time, to no, not really. Your clock is starting to run out. And so it just kind of, it's been a whirlwind these last few months trying to figure out, like, I do still want to be a mom. I'm still not where I feel like I personally would like to be professionally for having a kid. But now it's like, well, how much longer are you going to wait for something when this is something that you really want? So I made the decision. And the other thing about it is, at the same time I was finding out that it would be almost impossible for me to conceive naturally, I was also going through a breakup, ending of kind of like a romantic relationship. And so then you're just like, well, wait, like so now in my mind, it's like, well, I still haven't found the right person either. So what am I continuing to wait for?
Yeah. No, girl, I mean, I know a lot of women are out there struggling with the same thing. I myself started my own fertility journey. I am in the process of freezing my eggs, and I waited for multiple reasons, financially, same kind of thing. But I also still want that family church wedding and everything the traditional way.
Right.
I am also getting older. I have endometriosis, which can make it difficult to conceive. So,
Right.
You know what? F it. I'm going to do this. I specifically waited till World Series was over to then start that actual process of freezing the eggs, because it's a lot of injections and all of those other things. I mean, it's a process, and I know you have a very a funny story, but it's a relatable story. I know for a lot of women, when you were going through the process of the injection part, can you tell us a little bit about that part?
And when I first told Jen this story, Julie, I wish you could have seen her face, because she was like, are you kidding me? So it was in September. So the baseball season is winding down. I had a bunch of tickets left. And so it was also when I was starting my fertility, my hormone injections. And so I would have to inject myself every night with like 2 to 3 different medications every night for about 12 nights. And then the doctors and the nurses give you a very specific window in which you have to give yourself these injections. So I had one friend who went through the process of in vitro, and she gave birth to her first child a couple of months ago. And I was leaning on her a lot during the process. And I was like, well, I have these tickets to a Met game that like a friend of mine from college who now lives in the city, he really wanted to go. And he was like, hey, like, you're the biggest Mets fan I know, like, let's go. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. So I called the nurse and I'm like, hey, do I have to give myself these injections between 8 and 10 p.m.? Like, can I do it earlier? I was like, because like I have an event to go to, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, well, we give you that time for a reason. So we'd recommend you not going, more than like an hour before or an hour after your window. And then she was like, if anything, like, you can mix up your medications and fill the syringes and then just take them with you, and then, wherever you are, just give yourself the injections there. Yeah, this is where it gets. So I didn't want to give up going to the game, and not because it's the Mets. Okay, maybe partly because it was the Mets and it was a Met game, but because the fertility process in itself had drained me so much mentally and emotionally, and still having to work through all of that, I was working on 2 major projects. I needed a break. I just needed a night for myself. So I was like, if there's an opportunity for me to go to a game, like, I want to go. So I mixed all my medications. I filled up my syringes and I packed them in my bag and went to the stadium. And then, I'm like watching the game starts at 7. The game's going. I'm looking up at the clock. It's getting closer to 8 o'clock. And it's like the 3rd inning, 4th inning. And I'm just like, all right, I got to go give myself these injections. So I get up, I leave my friend. I told my friend, I was like, yeah, it's time for me to give myself my injections. I get up and I go into one of the restrooms at Citi Field to try to give myself the injection. And it's funny because this is just how weird life is that I'm in the bathroom trying to give myself these injections, and they're horrible. Like, you you have to inject yourself in your belly. It sucks. It really, really sucks. But meanwhile, I have a soundtrack going because they pipe in the radio feed for the game into the bathrooms. So I'm like listening to them call the game and players are getting hits and whatever. And here I am in the bathroom, like shaking, trying to give myself the injection, but I ended up doing it. And then I went to another game a couple of days later. And then I just was like comfortable enough to just give myself the injection at my seat. But that's the thing. Like, you just kind of have to push through. And like I said, like, when you find out that you can't have the one thing that you really want, it consumes so much of yourself that I was an emotional mess. So again, I just needed that one night. And I had to try to get myself to find that balance to where it's like, yes, this is something that I'm dealing with, but I'm not going to let it consume me. I'm not going to let it completely derail the things that I love doing and enjoy doing. Because my friend, she was like, well, yeah, when I had to give myself the injections, I basically just stayed in the house for 2 weeks. I didn't go anywhere. You know, I just laid low. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to completely put my life on hold. So I said, freak it. I'm just going to give myself the injections at the ballpark.
And I love it. I love all of it, because it's really important for women to know that there's no one right or wrong way to go about this, right? Just you do what is best for you. And I mean, we could talk about this for hours, and I hope that you will come back and we can even continue like this part of the conversation, because even the part about not having a boyfriend and then what do you do? Like my doctor was like, you need to, I suggest you inseminate at least half of your eggs with donor sperm, because what if you meet a guy, and what if they're not able to have a baby? Like, then what are you gonna do? And I'm like, shoot, you're right. I hadn't even thought about that. And so now I'm just like, damn, now I gotta go look at donor sperm and all of that stuff. So it's
welcome to my life. I've spent most of my free time researching potential donors for my baby. And it's like, and that process is overwhelming. And like, I sat with my doctor and made a plan, just like you were saying, where it's like, well, they were able to retrieve, when I had my egg retrieval, they retrieved 14 eggs, 9 were mature enough to freeze. Mm-hmm. So the nurse is like, okay, so, you know, if you want to, you don't have to inseminate any of them right now. If you do want to, you can only inseminate a few of them and make embryos. So like, we settled on like 4 embryos with like donor sperm would be a good number to work with. And then the rest, I just keep as is in case I do find someone. And so it's crazy, because there are all these things that you never thought you would have to think about that you now have to think about. And it becomes kind of funny in a lot of ways, because I'll be on the donor website and I'll see a description of a potential donor that I think is interesting. And so then I'll like send the link to a friend of mine, like, well, what do you think about this guy? What do you think? So I just have kind of kept like a folder of potentials. So not exactly what I like to be doing on my Saturday nights, but it is what it is.
No, I totally understand. And let's keep the conversation going. At La Vida Baseball, we celebrate the Latino culture and passion for baseball. Our mission is to amplify the stories of Latino players and share the stories that simply, you know what, aren't shared across mainstream media. And as the senior producer heading up the Diversified Content Division, why is it crucial that more time and energy and dollars are spent on storytelling that focuses on unrepresented voices in sports and culture?
It's important because there are so many amazing stories out there that need to be told. There are things that just need to be highlighted and just need to have attention drawn to. I think, you know, so I have the pleasure of where a lot of the content that I'm creating with my team in Diversified Sports Content is centered around cultural tentpoles. So whether it's something like, Hispanic Heritage Month, we just wrapped that, where we, helped build out an entire content strategy around that crosses over through all of the portfolio brands within Bleacher Report. To be able to, one of the stories that came out of that was former NHL player Al Montoya, who works with the Florida Panthers, and he has an AmeriGoal tournament every year. So it's like all these hockey teams from Latin American countries coming here to play. And it's something that doesn't really get that much attention, but it's so important to the culture of the community in Miami, where the tournament is always held. And to have all these teams coming from all these different places, if there aren't people telling those stories, they're not being celebrated, And it's just highlighting the beauty in diversity, and how, again, sports kind of brings us all together from all different walks of life, faiths, cultures, ethnicity, race, whatever. It's all things that we all have in common, like sports and music, those are like the two biggest things. And so to be able to kind of shed light on those types of stories, and it's not just like, so, big reflection pieces, it's a lot of celebrating and embracing the cultures and the customs and things like that. And so, to have that outlet and to now be in a position where I'm helping to tell those stories, it's really been really great for me professionally, because that's something that's so close to me and my heart.
Absolutely. And that kind of rolls into my next question for you. We'll do some quick fire round questions real quick, because I think you just answered it, but I'll ask anyway. What would you consider to be your superpower?
Actually, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think one of my superpowers is I'm very intuitive. I can spot something from a mile away. Like if you even think about withholding something from me, I'm pretty sure I'm going to catch on. I pay attention to a lot of little things and details, which is great for me career-wise because I'm very detail-oriented. But outside of work, like my intuition, I think is very spot on.
Great superpower to have. What's something that you've been wrong about and changed your mind on?
Fairy tales. There's no such thing.
No, don't say
Oh,
and again, I think just based on my experience, where you have this plan and it doesn't quite go the way you wanted it to go. And so I think a lot of times we kind of hold these very big high expectations, and then when they don't kind of come together the way you want them to, you're just a little disappointed.
But I will say this. I agree with you when you're in it. I think sometimes
that's fair.
That when we are, I always say that we see things when we're ready to see them. Mm-hmm. And we acknowledge the reason for things having happened, as traumatic, as unfortunate, as sad, fill in the blank, and their reasoning for the occurrence once we're out of it. Mm-hmm. As a hindsight 2020, if you want to call it that. Yeah. And I think especially in this career, in this industry, when we don't get a job or an opportunity, I know for myself, I would say, God, that was my dream job and they chose someone else. And how could that happen? And this is so frustrating. But then you look down the line a few years later, you're like, oh, thank God I didn't get that job. Or thank goodness that relationship didn't work out where I thought, right. I was ready to get married and I was ready to have all this stuff with life with this person. And, but
you end up getting 7 baby mamas. So then you're like, yes, thank God I'm not in that anymore.
So it's like a Summer Walker song that like what?
But I hope for you, Lakia, is that you do believe at some point, that you will believe again, because as an intuitive, sensing, feeling person, because I think all three of us are empaths here. I think we all feel that. I think for empaths especially, finding that silver lining is so important.
Yeah, that is my wish for you too. And I think we also have to visualize and create a different type of fairy tale, right? It's not the one that we grew up with. It is not Cinderella like. It is our own version of what a fairy tale can be. And so I agree. I agree with Julie. I hope and wish that your fairy tale comes true in the way that you want it to, right? In the way that is best for you. Lakia, thank you so much for sitting here with us and having a chat. This was a wonderful, such a good conversation. I can't wait to have you back on and continue it. Everyone, I need to specify this. Untold Stories, produced by Miss Lakia. I mean, look, Lakia, you guys did such an awesome job on the Untold Stories.
Thank you.
Yes, search it. I've never seen any type of content, baseball content like it. It is awesome what you guys did with that.
Thank you. It was fun. I've had a lot of fun working on that series in particular. It's very different, mixing live action, animation, and it's gotten a lot of great reception. So very proud of it. So thank you.
Whose idea was that, by the way, just before I let you go?
It actually started as a segment for a different show on Bleacher Report that was called Sims and Lefko with Chris Sims and Adam Lefko. And that show ended. And so they still wanted to kind of take that small segment and just retool it into its own show with a different host and kind of a little bit of a different look and feel. And so it just went from being like a little small, maybe like 1 minute, 90-second piece in a few episodes of one series to becoming its own kind of like brand, basically. So yeah, that's how it got started.
Awesome. Lakia, thank you so much. This is a wrap for The Locker Room. Thank you so much again for listening. I'm Jennifer Mercedes for Julie Alexandria. Stay tuned for the next episode. Don't miss it. All right, guys. Bye-bye.
This is something I have to do. With experience I have to be able to try to rebrand Latinos. We don't have a reality problem. We just have a perception problem. We're wonderful. We're beautiful. We just are not seen.